This hurricane season has been odd. Not only did we see a subtropical storm form in January that didn't get named, then we had a storm form on June 1st. Now we have main development region action in the Atlantic. This is Tropical Storm Bret, which is the second named storm of the hurricane season this year, but not the second disturbance, as again we had that subtropical storm in January. So this is technically the third disturbance. But this storm does have potential impacts on the Leeward Islands, potentially as a major hurricane, as sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic have been extremely high, much above average. But currently, this storm has 40-mile-an-hour sustained winds, 1,008 minimum central pressure, and is moving 21 miles an hour to the west. Let's go in depth into this storm. So let's start off by looking at the cone issued by the National Hurricane Center for this storm. If you look closely, this is a longer cone because we do have 7 days now starting off this year. But you can see here that on Wednesday, we could see this storm evolve into a hurricane. And Thursday night into Friday morning, we could see this storm hit the Leeward Islands, just on the edge of the Caribbean Sea. Now, this storm could rapidly intensify across the main development region of the Atlantic, and that is why we could see potentially a major hurricane out of this storm. There is a very small possibility of that. Now, this storm will weaken by the time it gets to the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, and that is estimated to be on Saturday. So let's take a look at the arrival time of winds with wind speed probabilities turned on. And you can see here that the highest wind speed probabilities are right by the storm, but you can see a little stripe down the center there. That means that this is a very, very small storm, and that main area of tropical storm and hurricane force winds is going to be very, very close to the center, which is a good thing. But if you look at the Leeward Islands, you can see that Barbados is going to be first, and you could start seeing those tropical storm force winds between Wednesday at 8 p.m. and Thursday at 8 a.m. The rest of the Leeward Islands is between Thursday at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Then you have Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic sometime on Friday getting those tropical storm force winds. But let's also look at the key messages for Tropical Storm Bret. Let's read them out right now. Bret is forecast to strengthen and move across the Lesser Antilles as a hurricane on Thursday and Friday, bringing a risk of flooding from heavy rainfall, hurricane-force winds, and dangerous storm surge and waves. Given the larger than usual uncertainty in the track forecast, it is too early to specify the location and magnitude of where these hazards could occur. However, everyone in the Lesser Antilles, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands should monitor updates to the forecast for Bret and have their hurricane plan in place. So let's move over to the satellite imagery and see how this storm really formed this early. So here is the satellite imagery for Tropical Storm Bret given to us by the GOES 16 satellite, which is run by NOAA. Now you can see on this satellite imagery that we have a tightly formed center now. Of course, this is a tropical storm, but you can see that the actual thunderstorm development is not evenly spread across the tropical storm, with the northeast quadrant having much less thunderstorm activity than the other 3 quadrants. And that is because this was a wave off of the coast of Africa, and it's really starting to organize now. That's when it got named as a tropical storm, is when those organized thunderstorms really got their act together. And they're going to continue to get their act together. As you can see, that there is some new thunderstorm development right in the core as well as the outer band to the southwest of the center of the storm. So that is where we could be seeing that rapid intensification, is through those thunderstorms popping up and really bringing this thing into a more organized system. So we do have to watch how this thing progresses, as well as the sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic, which are much above average and could aid in those thunderstorms really popping up and giving this thing a little extra juice in the Atlantic. All right, let's head on over to Tropical Tidbits and start off with our current storm information. Starting off here with our global hurricane models. You can see the spaghetti chart on the map here, and each spaghetti strand, as I like to call them, is one separate model showing the track of this storm, given X amount of hours. So you can see here for the first 72 hours, most models agree that this storm is going to be generally traveling west, west-northwest, somewhere right in the middle there. Then that's when things get a little wacky. This storm is going to pull off to the north at some point, but will it do so before the Leeward Islands, as it's hitting the Leeward Islands, or well after it hits the Leeward Islands? So you have a few models here right on the northern end of the spectrum here before the Leeward Islands having the storm turn off to the north. We have a few here in the middle showing that the storm is going to start to curl off as the storm is hitting the Leeward Islands and potentially hit Puerto Rico. But most models have this storm entering the Caribbean Sea and staying relatively on that same plane, maybe a little bit of an inch towards the north as it gets towards the Dominican Republic. But in general, we could take each of these, kind of average them out, and that would be pretty close to what the National Hurricane Center is showing in their cone. Next up, let's take a look at the European model, where we have very few spaghetti strands, but what we can get from this is that the European model very much thinks that this storm is going to be pretty far south to start out. And if we translate that to our global hurricane models, the further south that a track is, the more likely it is to enter the Caribbean Sea and stay pretty much on that west-northwest track. So let's move on here to the GEFS. And you can see here that the GEFS has that turn happening very sharp around 168 hours. And that is just after the storm passes by Haiti. It makes that turn very sharp to the north. And the GEPS has the storm going straight into the Caribbean Sea and could potentially have this storm hitting Central America. So let's also talk about intensity, which is a very big factor in this storm. Actually, the biggest factor. We kind of know the track is going to be close to the Leeward Islands. Even though there is a lot of uncertainty about what happens from that point, we do know that the Leeward Islands will be at risk from this storm. But the main indicator of how the impacts are going to be is obviously the intensity. So we have our spaghetti strands again, each model run outputting a different intensity, and this is in our wind speed in knots. So you can see that in general, most models have this peaking out around a mid-grade Category 1 hurricane. But there are plenty of models on both ends of the spectrum, some that are more intense, some that are less intense. So we have a few models taking this storm into Category 2 or Category 3 strength, and the HWRF is one of them, which is what we're going to look at later. But we also have plenty of models keeping the storm as a tropical storm, and maybe even diminishing down to a tropical depression as the storm starts to hit the Leeward Islands. But if we take the average, the mean, that is that main track there, increasing in intensity over the next 60 hours into a mid-grade Category 1 storm, kind of flattening out that intensity over the 60 to 96 hour time frame, and then gently starting to decrease in strength after the 4-day mark. So that is kind of what we're looking at with Bret right now, but of course, a little change in sea surface temperatures, a little change in the wind shear in the atmosphere could really change things very drastically on this chart. So make sure to stay tuned here. I will be providing updates as often as possible on this storm, especially if these charts drastically change. But let's look at the HWRF hurricane model. And we have two different model runs here. One is of the reflectivity, which is basically the simulated radar. And as we go through here, you can see that the storm gently starts to increase. And you can realize that just by the shape of the storm, but also by that little number over the L symbol. That is the millibar count. And the lower the pressure, which is what millibars kind of act as the measurement of the lower the millibar count, the stronger the storm is, the stronger the winds are. So you can see that the storm really starts to get into gear as it approaches the Leeward Islands. You can see Barbados there, and 966 millibars. And that is a very strong storm. And around there, you could be seeing this storm form into a major hurricane according to this model. And it peaks out around 955 millibars. And then as it starts to make its way to the north, it increases that millibar count just a little bit, which means that it is decreasing in strength. But it kind of hovers around that same intensity, which is not good for areas like the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. So let's take a look at those wind speeds here. And you can see that this storm starts out very, very slow. Really starts to get into gear here on Tuesday. Wednesday, we could see this form into a hurricane. That's very similar to what the National Hurricane Center says that will happen. But after that, this is where the HWRF really starts to explode this storm. And the HWRF also has a very good history of overemphasizing some storms, especially in the main development region. But that doesn't mean that this isn't out of play. Obviously, we can take every single model with a grain of salt and really not have anything. But this model is pretty accurate on track as well. So we do take it, I take it at least, with maybe not as much of emphasis as I do for any other ensemble models that we were looking at earlier, like those spaghetti models. But we do have a fairly good amount of guidance that could be saying that this is a Category 2, Category 3 at landfall in the Leeward Islands, or if it glances right through the Leeward Islands. But right now, the HWRF is showing a 113 knot peak right before it hits the Leeward Islands. And as Bret hits the Leeward Islands, that would be a major hurricane. If that does happen, again, it is one model. We don't take all of the models at the same pace as we do like a nor'easter, something like that. So I'll be looking out for it, but it is very, very possible that we see a hurricane hitting the Leeward Islands later this week. But that hurricane number, right, what category hurricane we see, is still up for debate just a little bit. But that is all the information that I have for today. Make sure to stay tuned here for more updates. I post shorts on the tropical weather updates as well. So make sure to stay tuned here for more information on Bret. But that is all I have for today. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time.